They went on a $60.00 vacation without me, left me home alone with the dog. I sold the $4.20 beach house. While they were still on the plane, I kept the dog. And the view. They say some houses smell of salt and memory, that the air can hold decades of laughter and tears, of dishes prepared and secrets kept. My little beach house breathes that salt and memory. Each sunrise is layered in coral and gold, each wave passing like a soft whisper of a past life. The floors creak in certain spots, reminding me of where I taught my granddaughter to spin, of where my husband once slipped and I saved him from hitting the floor. I live alone now, aside from my faithful companion, the old black Labrador with graying jowls, who pads beside me as I shuffle into the kitchen every morning. I pour coffee into the same chipped mug with the gold rim, the one the grandchildren say looks like something antiques websites would sell for $80. I do not mind. The mug is my surgery scar, my granddaughter's drawings, my husband's chipped smile immortalized in paint. I lean against the counter, the morning sun touching my cheek. The breeze carries the scent of plumeria and salt, and I talk aloud to the dog because he listens when the world does not. All right, boy, another morning. Me, the dog, and the ocean. We still matter, boy. We just do it quietly. He wags his tail, head tipped upward, and we stand together in that quiet dignity. The house is mine, or supposed to be. Every board in this place has my fingerprints, every lamp, every framed photograph. My husband and I built this house over decades, foundation by foundation, nail by nail, dream by dream. After he passed, I carried the weight of those dreams, stitched them into the walls and corners of this place. I could never let it go, not for a price. Not even when my son argued that selling would make more financial sense, that I was being sentimental, that letting go was just math. I refused. This house is memory, not premium square footage. So, this morning, like last morning and like the morning before, I stand here, listening to the waves and breathing in the place where my life unfolded. Then I hear it, the soft rumble of the car engine packing down the gravel driveway, thud-thud of suitcases, a faint murmur of laughter, and then the roar of a plane door closing. Their plane, my son, my daughter-in-law, my grandchildren, blast off into tropical vacation glory without me, a $60,000 Hawaii vacation. I keep breathing. I pretend I do not know. I pretend I do not care. I whisper to the Labrador, "Just us, boy, always us." Later, I will hear the echo of words that clip through me like brittle glass. "You're lying there sucking up oxygen like an old dog. Go to Hawaii. While we enjoy paradise, just leave her behind. She's yesterday's garbage, just walking memorabilia. Best to send her with the mutt. And Mama is more like a dog than a human now. If she does not sleep quiet, she should be locked in a kennel." They do not say these words to my face, but they do not have to. I hear them in the silence after the car drive off, in the click of the suitcases on the driveway stones, and my heart hollows out. But I do not cry. Tears are for wounds that have been opened. My wounds are old, but they still smart. I pour a second cup of coffee, strong, dark, and stand at the window, looking at the horizon. I talk to the dog again. They think I am just air, boy, empty and passing. But even the wind can shape cliffs. I step outside in bare feet, the sand clinging to my toes, salt crust in my hair turning silver where my husband once grew brown. I walk toward the desk in my study, the one where I keep papers and old letters, my life in ink. I sit, hands trembling slightly as I push open the drawer. Inside are years of decisions, trust agreements, property deeds, legal amendments I had insisted on because one can lose memory oceans before the law forgets. And right there, the papers appear like a promise. The irrevocable trust with my name, the clause that grants me the right of first refusal if the property is to be sold. Signed and notarized 2 months before they planned this trip, the trust that requires any sale to offer me the first option to buy, the clause I deliberately insisted upon so that I would not be summarily erased. I breathe in, I breathe out. The dog watches, head tilted, as if he understands every flicker of pain, every memory of laughter at family barbecues, every quiet moment we shared when grief was all I had. I placed the papers on the desk. With care, I type. To the escrow company, attorneys, and real estate agents of record. Please consider this email formal refusal of any sale. The right of first refusal clause has not been waived by the owner, Ms. Eleanor Whitmore. I exercise my rights in full and will decide the future of this property when I see fit. I send the email. It goes off like a bell toll in empty room. Later I will receive a confirmation email. Sale halted, pending resolution, as legally required. I sit back in my chair, coffee growing cold, dog by my feet. I breathe. They left me with the dog and a label, useless, invisible. But I am not invisible, and I am not done. I walk back to the window, and the waves slap against rocks like applause, and I whisper, I still matter. I used to believe that relationships were built on laughter at the dinner table, on soft goodnights whispered across the hallway, on photographs lining the wall, proof that someone was there. But today, I learned how silence carries a broken heart much better than noise ever could. When the plane took off without me, I was still standing at the window, watching a plume of white smoke cut blue sky. That plume carried more than vacation memories. It carried the laughter of grandchildren and the warmth of promised visits. But I was left behind, with only the sea to anchor me. That first night after they all flew away, I lay awake, the moonlight pooling across the bedspread. I could feel the emptiness spread through the house, inch by inch, dissolving the safety of walls I'd built with love. That's when I began to understand what I stood to lose. Not just a house, but every echo of a life. The next morning, I made coffee and pressed the filter between my fingers, longer than needed, trying to slow time. I watched the dog peer out the window, ears flicking at the sound of the ocean and the quiet absence of the people he once knew. I petted him and told him, it's just you and me now, and we'll be just fine. Then I heard them, in the living room, the voice muffled but unmistakable. We should call them tomorrow, my son said, tone casual, almost rehearsed, and tell them we're selling, that this place, I mean our parents' house, is more money than memories now. My breath snagged. Not memories, not ours, my story, my civic duty, my pain, my breath. Yeah, his wife replied, flipping through an online listing for coastal properties. We'll send her an assisted living brochure. She's slowing us down. Slowing us down? I pressed my hand to my chest, as though my breathing depended on soothing my heart back into rhythm. Their words picked their way into my bones. I had to fight the impulse to burst through the door and demand respect. Instead, I took a trembling breath, and I walked down the hallway at my own pace. Memories flickered in the frames on the wall. Birthday candles, Christmas mornings, my husband's hand resting on my shoulder, the way the grandchildren smiled when I surprised them with ocean ice cream. Those memories were more precious than any real estate. I sank onto the sofa, dog-hopping into my lap. I cupped him close and whispered, they think I'm clutter. But love leaves no clutter, only roots. I pulled open the antique desk drawer in the living room, the one where I kept years' worth of paperwork, memories of fiscal responsibility, and the clause my husband added to our trust. If the property is ever sold, Eleanor must be offered first refusal to buy it. The ink had faded, but the meaning had not. I read it again. Their plan to erase me could not succeed if I refused to waive my rights. I glanced at the dog. He looked up with soft eyes, and I felt like he was telling me quietly, you are not invisible. I buried my face in my hands and thought of all the times I had let myself vanish. I let their loud laughter at the beach dinners drown out my quiet songs. I let their busy lives make my figure move into the margins. But if they were buying distance with cash and plane tickets, I was ready to claim presence with my stubborn heart. I powered on the old computer, fingers shaking slightly. I found the email address of our escrow attorney. I drafted the message the same way I'd talked to him when I first inherited ownership. Directly, clearly, no room for assumption. Dear Escondido title. Ms. Eleanor Whitmore is exercising her right of first refusal. I decline all offers. Please hold any sale in abeyance. Thank you. I clicked send with deliberate force. The email sent, my voice weaving through digital currents, louder than their suitcases leaving the driveway. I watched the spin of the mic cursor on the screen for a moment, before it stopped, like dawn breaking into concrete. I exhaled and whispered again to the ocean, "I'm still here." For the rest of that day, I sat at the window, dog curled beside me, both of us inhaling the ocean. I did not know if the law would shield me or if the house would remain mine, but I knew I had taken the first step toward reclaiming a place they thought they could discard. I stood at the edge of the porch and spoke. They sold a dream while I slept. Maybe now we fight awake. And I was awake enough to know that memory never dies when someone refuses to forget. I woke the next morning, feeling a tremor of something unfamiliar beneath my ribs. Resolve. The house was quiet, except for the rhythmic pulse of waves beyond the windows. I sat at my desk, a small lamp casting a ribbon of yellow light over the papers where life's decisions already lay. It felt like standing at the threshold of my own reckoning. I was no longer just a caretaker of memories. I was their guardian. I opened the drawer and retrieved 3 documents, each folded neatly. Years old but potent. One was the property deed with a clause my husband insisted upon, a right of first refusal for me. Another was a letter of authorization naming our longtime family lawyer, Mr. Lin, as my legal representative if anything happened to me. And the third was the irrevocable trust agreement, again affirming that no sale could proceed without my explicit written consent. Holding them, I felt both frail and ferocious. I set the documents before me and grabbed the phone. The number to Mr. Lin still lived in my memory from so many years ago. I dialed, and his calm voice answered with gentle surprise. "Eleanor," he said. "Goodness, how are you?" I cleared my throat, voice tremulous but steady. "I need your help. Immediately." Within minutes, he was on his way to the house. Meanwhile, I sat at the desk and began writing an email to the escrow company that had been handling the potential sale, tying my hands with words that drew a boundary of legal precision. To whom it may concern, this email serves as formal notification that I, Eleanor Whitmore, exercise my right of first refusal over the sale of the property at, as outlined in the trust documents dated, I have not provided a waiver or consent for sale. Therefore, any pending sale is void and must be halted immediately. Sincerely, Eleanor Whitmore. I sent it and then stared at the screen, watching the email disappear from my outbox. It felt like an anchor had dropped in the sea of this struggle. I was making them notice me now. Mr. Lin arrived, his gray hair and gentle eyes giving me unexpected comfort. He looked at the stacked documents and nodded. "You're correct," he said. "They can't move forward if you don't agree. We'll formalize that, serve notice properly." He asked if I wanted to bring this to court, or to issue a restraining notice, or to negotiate peace. I looked at him, soft but unbreakable, and I simply said, "I want to keep the house. I already know what's worth the fight." Over the next few hours, we typed and printed additional legal filings, mailing them via overnight courier to the title company, the listing agent, and the law firm that had quietly prepared sale documents. Everything procedural, everything ironclad. As twilight approached, Mr. Lin asked how I was feeling. I looked out at the surf, the horizon bleeding pink. I told him that today, I am not a relic or an impediment. I am the woman they drove away for their gain, but I am still here, and so is everything I stood for. He looked at me with respect. "You're not just fighting for a house, you're fighting for your dignity and their humanity." A moment of silence passed. Then he said, "Rest now. I'll finish the paperwork and e-file by morning." I nodded and, for the first time in years, felt the weight of fear loosen in my chest. That night, I sat on the porch with the dog on my lap. I held my husband's handkerchief in my other hand, a worn piece of linen with his initials. I whispered into the salt air, "We do not just live, we stand." I fed the dog and let him fall asleep leaning against me. I closed the porch door softly, and the house hummed with a light, protective glow around me. I am not just a ghost in this house anymore. I woke early on day 4, before the sun had drawn itself into the sky. The light was pale, hesitant, perfect for what needed to happen. The house was still, the ocean murmuring gently beyond the window. I still hold my husband's blue envelope, folded so many times it feels like hope wrapped in linen. His handwriting glows on its surface. "Trust Eleanor's wisdom." I placed the envelope on the desk, which held the trust documents, the right of first refusal clause, and the contact details for the family's lawyer. My fingers trembled as I reached for the family ring, wedding band, and memory in gold. I slipped it off, set it beside the envelope, and picked up the pen, knowing what I must do. They called this house asset. I call it memory. They called me barrier. I call myself a gardener, tending the roots of what was rightfully ours. So I prepared the final instrument of resistance. I composed the deed, an irrevocable bargain sale to a respected nonprofit, the Hawaii Land Trust, HILT, which protects precious land for future generations. HILT, I knew the acronym well. They had saved ancient coastal groves and preserved sacred ponds. I typed, sale contract for the Hawaii Land Trust property, Beach House address. Sale price, $1.00 USD. Bargain sale to conserve heritage. Terms, property to be used solely for education, conservation, and heritage. No commercial development, no subdivision. This bargain sale is hereby granted irrevocably by Eleanor Whitmore, sole owner. Signed Eleanor Whitmore, date, today's date. I signed it carefully, the blue ink like heartbeat on vellum. This wasn't real estate. It was legacy. I called Mr. Lin to verify legality. He held the papers, nodded, and said softly, even if they sued over it, the court would uphold. It's your legal, moral stand. Then, with calm precision, I emailed the sale and deed to the escrow company, the family's broker, and Mr. Lin himself. Subject line, notice of irrevocable transfer to Conservation Trust. It carried no anger, no accusations, just love for what the house was meant to be. Within minutes, the house's title was marked as Protected Conservation Trust. Any attempt to sell it for development would now be legally blocked. The price was set not by market, but by meaning. At that moment, I felt something shift. I was no longer a receding memory. I was the pulse of the place. I had traded profit for preservation. I sat in silence, dog curled at my feet, and simply watched the waves. That glassy moment was full. I did not shout. I did not send certificates or press releases. But within hours, a title company's confirmation email arrived. Sale confirmed and recorded. Hawaii Land Trust now holds title for conservation purposes. No further transfer permitted. Thank you, owner complied with deed and legal obligations. I whispered, we did it, boy. I did not post a status update. I did not schedule a meeting with family or press. I just walked to the porch, carrying my coffee, and breathed in the breath of that house, its lilies, its sunrise, its memory. Later that day, in the vast Pacific sky above, their plane would cross back. I could almost feel them settling into their seats, mouths curved upward in tropical anticipation. But they would come home to find no sale, no cash, no run-of-the-mill home to flip. There would be a report from escrow, a legal status of conservation immutable, a house they never thought I still owned, brimming with meaning. I felt silent triumph. They left me invisible, like I was air or clutter. But now, I had moved the real estate board. I had turned their asset into sanctuary. I had erased their profit and offered my heart back to the sea. Walking through the rooms that evening, lantern light casting soft shadows, I looked at each photograph, each handprint on the windowsill. I told the house, you see me now. The dog barked at a cat sneaking past the porch. I just laughed, lightly, because I was alive again. Not lost, not erased. They thought I would just fade. They thought I was a ghost drifting in this house. But I am the heart at its center. I revived the memory. I kept the dog. I kept the view. And now it will be cared for by those who cherish it. I remember the moment their plane door shut on my silence. I stood at the window, coffee cup in hand, the sea glittering beneath dawn. I did not jump at a barking, but listened to the shifting air. In my heart, a tremor of satisfaction. I had made a move they could neither ignore nor reverse. Hours later, a furious pounding rattled the front door. I hadn't even changed from yesterday's robe, but I answered. My son's face was red, wild, eyes tiled with disbelief. "Mom," he said, voice breaking, "this is betrayal. What is wrong with you?" Behind him, my daughter-in-law glared at me with something like disgust. I looked at their faces, the luxury of vacation sun still clinging to their skin, fraying against this house's quiet dignity. "What have you done?" he shouted. "You sold our family home for $1? To who?" I did not flinch. I held the door, letting them stare, seethe, and then, quietly, "To a trust that will preserve it, not for sale, not for profit." "Preserve it?" He shook his head. "You're unhinged. You've lost your mind." So that's when I stood my ground. I led them into the den and pointed, calm, precise, to stacks of evidence on my desk. "Read." There was an authenticated letter from the neurologist confirming I was mentally competent, a certified cognitive assessment done just last month. I reached for the file, the trust paperwork, the right of first refusal clause, my letter to escrow, and Mother's special bargain deed to the land trust. I slid them across the desk. "Everything here is legal, signed, notarized, filed. I have done every step within my rights and the law." Silence pressed on us. The dog sat at my feet, alert to the tension, but trusting me entirely. My son gripped the papers, voice trembling. "But you, why didn't you say anything?" I said nothing. Instead, I opened the window, letting the ocean breeze swirl in with harborside salt. I walked to the countertop and poured stronger coffee. I placed a cup before my son. He stared at the cup and then at me. "I am not broken," I said, voice low. "I am tired of vanishing. I am not a footnote. This house is living memory. It beats here, where I live." My daughter-in-law's lips quivered as she glanced at the contract terms, forbidding commercial resale. "They will not drag my story into foreclosure or flip it for vacation dollars. I love this place. I will protect it, even when protecting it costs me everything else." Their anger simmered with humiliation. They realized the fortress they tried to dismantle just pulled the drawbridge up. My daughter-in-law spit words like salt. "You're a senile old woman, scaring us all with this legal nonsense." I calmly approached her and placed the neurologist certification with the others. "This says otherwise." I handed them to her without hate, just clarity. I felt my heart splinter, but steadied. I had not expected gratitude. I only wanted recognition, being seen. They were not ready. That is difference. I strode to the bookshelf and retrieved a framed photo of my late husband. We told each other we would preserve a legacy, not just for children, but for every whisper and wave in this house. I set the photo on the desk before them. "This is memory," I said, "and I will not let it be sold." I turned away, steeped in resolve. They left the room, quiet with defeat, leaving me with the dog and the waves of this place I safeguarded. I poured another cup of coffee, watching surf sunlight scatter like justice across the horizon. I held on to the desk when the court clerk called my name. "Eleanor Whitmore." The air in the courtroom was formal, heavy wood, faint echo, eyes upon me. I straightened my shoulders, feeling the weight and warmth of every memory I had preserved. Today, I stood not as a ghost or a burden, but as a rightful owner demanding justice. My son took the stand first, eyes glassy with regret and anger. He used every phrase he believed would condemn me. Senile, manipulated, ungrateful. He said things like, "Mom didn't understand what she was signing, and she's not of sound mind, Your Honor." My heart scraped the floor, but I did not flinch. My attorney, Mr. Lynn, stood after, calm, dignified. He laid out the documents, the trust agreement, right of first refusal clause, the neurologist's certification, the bargain deed to the land trust, all meticulously signed and notarized. Page by page, he demonstrated how legally binding each element was, how I had acted with full knowledge and clear mind. He turned to the judge and said, "Your Honor, this sale was proper. It was executed in full legal compliance. The defendant was fully competent and acted to preserve what would otherwise have been liquidated. The law supports her. She is not only sane, she was wise." In that moment, I felt my breath anchor back to me. The court quieted as we awaited the verdict. Not tears, but something deeper. The knowledge that I had turned silent pain into righteous claim. The judge scanned the papers and looked at me through rimmed glasses. Then he ruled, "I find that Miss Whitmore has acted within her legal rights. She is competent, the property was sold only after proper notice, and all legal procedures were followed. The transfer to the Conservation Trust stands. I also note that the conduct of those alleging her incompetence raises ethical questions of exploitation. This court affirms the sale as valid and binding." And so, The gavel fell softly, like a heartbeat punctuating a memoir. A ripple passed through the courtroom. My children's faces wilted. I did not want to savor their defeat. I only wanted to reclaim my life. I spoke then, words measured, voice smooth but unwavering. Thank you, Your Honor. I simply protected what I love. This house is memory, and today it has become justice. I turned and saw my attorney nod. The family stared downward. I walked out with the Labrador by my side, feeling every eye in that room lift, not in contempt, but in recognition. Outside the courthouse, the sun hit me like absolution. My dog nuzzled me, the fur warm, alive, loyal. I looked at him and breathed. We did not just win a court case. We reclaimed a promise. I stood on the porch early in the morning, the salty air filling my lungs, carrying stories of wave after wave, stories I had lived and protected. The verdict yesterday had cleared the way for rightness, not retaliation. The house was saved, the memories were secure. But what would I do with that victory? My feet ached, not from age, but from walking through years of silence. Now, I needed to walk toward something else. I stepped inside and opened the mail. Each envelope carried confirmation that the sale was legally recognized and irrevocable. Title transferred to the Hawaii Land Trust. No going back. No loopholes. The documents had the official feel of closure. My children may have assumed I would collapse, shrivel, fade into obscurity after their big vacation. Instead, I felt revival. I walked steadily to the antique writing desk where the deed and trusts sat. I ran my fingers along the edges of the conservation agreement, mindful of how I had turned possession into preservation. That was not defiance only, but love. But love doesn't end at reclamation. It becomes generosity. I remembered how my husband used to say, "A life without gratitude is a life half lived." I missed him every day, even more now because he believed in honoring what time could erase. I pulled out an old journal he'd given me, fabric-bound, filled with blank pages, and placed it on the desk. Then I reached for stationery and began writing. I have just completed a transaction that restores the soul of our home, no longer for sale, no longer apart from its story. In its stead, I invite you to bear witness, to remember, to care. I dedicate part of my small inheritance to establishing the Thank You Fund. This fund will grant scholarships, mentorship programs, and legal assistance to elders who have been cast aside when they were no longer deemed useful. This house still stands as memory. Let us ensure human dignity stands also. I signed the journal with a steady hand. Eleanor Whitmore. I closed the lid and carried it to the kitchen, where the coffee was always waiting, never demanding. I poured myself a cup and carried it out to the front yard, where the plumeria blossoms dropped onto the lawn like blessings in pink, white, and yellow. The dog padded beside me, tail swishing gently, the only other heartbeat in the space. I thought of those elders, perhaps a neighbor who lived alone, perhaps the widower down the street whose son no longer called, perhaps the woman who once watched me cook from her kitchen window. They are us. They are memory-bearing vessels, and they deserve a reflection, a moment of recognition. I spent that day calling and writing. I located community leaders, teachers, activists. I invited them to help me build the fund. I set up a modest endowment, starting with the funds that would have been part of the sale. Even at a fraction of what that home was worth, it could fund care, writing workshops, health visits, small, yes, but heartfelt. Emails flew out, phone calls hummed in the afternoon heat, and answers trickled back. Count me in. How can I help? Yes, that matters. 2 days later, I held a small gathering in the backyard. My children arrived, hesitant, shadows still flickering on their faces. I served lemonade, the dog on my lap. I announced to them, gently, I used my rights to preserve not just my house but our humanity. I am now dedicating that legacy to those who become invisible, because I refuse to become invisible myself. Tears glistened in my daughter-in-law's eyes, tears I did not interpret as guilt, but as recognition. My son remained silent, but the edge of shame slid from his shoulders like waves retreating from sand. The community organizer I invited spoke next. Eleanor, you have transformed heartbreak into hope. You built a legacy that will outlast property lines. Thank you. I placed a hand on her arm and said, softly, thank you for saying it. That evening, the dog and I sat on the porch, the sky melting into rose and lavender. My granddaughter ran by, bare feet splashing in garden fountains. I watched her giggle, and in that laugh, I heard the future. A future secured not by bricks, but by memory, kindness, and resilience. I whispered to the dog, "We gave better than revenge today, boy." He looked up at me and barked, as though he understood gratitude in his own way. In the days that followed, the local newspaper ran a short piece, "Coastal House Saved by Matriarch's Quiet Bravery, Transformed into Scholarship Endowment." They called me a hero. I thought of calling halls of fame, but I did not. I thought instead of more elders who didn't have a voice. I wrote them letters, invitations to share stories. Life slowed into a gentler rhythm. Each morning I brewed coffee, checked on the fund's website, replied to emails from people offering help, people needing help, people who said, "Thank you for reminding me I still matter." Sometimes my children would come over, not to demand, not to grovel, but to hold plate of cookies, share stories. I embraced them, but I did not let them rewrite their absence. They came back into my orbit, not because they had lost something, but because I had created something other than division, something rooted in compassion. One afternoon, as I weeded in the garden, my grandson handed me a dandelion bouquet, intentional and half mischievous. I blinked in surprise. "That's a dandelion, Grandma." I laughed, soft and true, which means every single one is a wish waiting to happen. He beamed. I gathered him in my arms and breathed in the scent of earth and childhood, and I knew, in that moment, that I stood not at the end of a struggle, but at the threshold of a legacy. I had reclaimed the house, I had reclaimed my dignity, and now I claimed my purpose. A purpose not tethered to memory alone, but to the heartbeat of future generations. The morning the community center opened, I stood on the porch of that house one last time. Sunlight played across the plumeria petals lining the path. The air smelled of salt and possibility. The world I'd fought for stood behind me, a guardian of memory and place. I held the old photograph of me and my faithful dog, taken long ago on the white sand at sunrise, the two of us looking toward horizons that now belonged to no one but those who respect them. That photograph had become central to the house-turned-center's foyer, mounted on a wooden plaque engraved with my name and the name of the Hawaii Land Trust. It read, "Eleanor Whitmore, Keeper of Memory." Beneath it, people paused to read the quote, inscribed in a gilded frame. They thought I was the dog minder, but I watch over the view. Those who see value are not always those who preserve. Those who preserve deserve our honor. When the doors opened, a tapestry of faces swept inside, children who would go to college with scholarships from the Thank You Fund, elderly couples nodding in gratitude, students from conservation programs taking notes, and volunteers with gardening gloves in hand. The house felt alive again, not with stories past, but with stories growing. One by one they approached the photograph, bowed heads softly raised. I stood beside it, still and quiet, holding the dog's leash. We had become symbols, not of broken legacy, but of restored legacy, alive, rooted, and thriving. In the afternoon, a short ceremony began. Young voices from the scholarship program shared how their grandmothers had taught them kindness. Their words threaded through the room, weaving a sense of connection. Then I was invited to speak. I stepped forward, however old my voice. I smiled down at the photograph on the wall, then looked out at the faces before me. "This house used to be just a house," I said. "Now it is home to memory, to future, to kindness." I did not build a foundation of stone alone. I built it with every person who remembers there is value in remembering. I paused, watched the dogs on the lawn, the children cradling notebooks, the elders who still shone with wisdom. I thought I was just the dog minder, someone to ignore. But I watch over the view, and I learned something. Seeing value does not mean preserving it. The ones who do the preserving, they deserve honor. There were nods, a tear or two, and the hush of meaning in a room built on respect. But I also needed to speak of renewal, not just survival. I turned, faced the center's board of trustees, the nonprofit, the school leaders, the funding partners. Together, let us keep this house alive, not only in brick, but in purpose. Let us remember that kindness is as real as any deed, and that legacy outlives architecture. I am no longer invisible, because I chose to become visible in the guardianship of memory. The curtain had closed on that car ride home, the silence that I felt in my bones when I awoke alone. That chapter was done. The next lines were being written, delicately, humbly, in gratitude. For those who showed ingratitude, I added a final section in my private journal, to close the story personally. To those who left without seeing me, I am not angry. You thought I was fading, but I became the foundation. You thought I was burden. I became the blessing. Go forward with memory. Remember my name warmly or not at all. But know this, only the keeper of the land earns its peace. So may your illusions of profit fade, and may you learn that true legacy is not given, it is earned. I closed the book and set it aside. It was not intended for display, just closure. That evening, I walked down to the shoreline, the dog by my side. Dusk traced golden lines on the water. I drew a line in the sand with my cane, and the tide washed it away gently. I thought, we are all lines in memory. Some vanish, some become footprints, some become foundations for others. I had chosen. I whispered with certainty, may those who fail to preserve lose their claim, and may those who love deeply be the ones who build tomorrow. And if you know someone, perhaps a mother, a grandmother, or even yourself, who was ever left behind, forgotten, or underestimated, remember, the silence they carry is never empty. It's filled with the strength of generations who knew how to endure before they ever had the chance to speak. Their stories deserve to be told. Their voices deserve to be heard. I leaned back against the sand and watched day slip into night, feeling calm as the tide and fully at peace. Thank you for staying with me until the very last wave of this story. If it moved you, if you saw your own grandmother or yourself in the quiet strength behind every word, then know this. Stories like these are not just told, they are remembered. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories for more real tales of dignity, silence, and justice, told not with shouting, but with truth. Because revenge has no expiration date, and when a grandma speaks, the world finally listens. See you on the next porch.